Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast will continue with more great Smallville and Superman talk even after their series coverage concludes. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This is All-Star Superboy, Chapter 3, and for the midpoint in our Connor Kent saga, we have a special double feature. In the second half of this episode, I'll be welcoming back Mike Sangregorio as we break down the final two runs on the solo Superboy title from 94 to 2002. He and I will be discussing the run by Joe Kelly and Pasqual Ferry, and the final few issues of the series by Jimmy Palmiotti, Dan DiDio, and John McCrea. But first, joining me to discuss the second Carl Kiesel Tom Grummett run on the Superboy series is our pal and returning guest, Ralph Puma. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me as always.
My pleasure. This is their second run, issues 50 through 79. And I would say the two biggest headlines here, number one, this is when the setting shifts from Hawaii to CADMUS as Superboy becomes CADMUS's field agent. So we're firmly in our Agent of CADMUS era. And even more kind of big picture, Kiesel and Grummett lean in real hard to the works of Jack Kirby, and in fact, even go so far as crediting Kirby in every issue as their inspiration. Yeah. So I want to toss it to you first. We'll get into this more specifically, but just overall, especially as someone who has really immersed himself in the works of Jack Kirby, as you have, far more than I have, I'm so curious to get your take, just what your overall impressions were. And was this a first read, a reread? What's your experience with this run?
So I started maybe after the wild area part of it. It was really amorphous to me because it was like, oh, I kind of remember this. I don't remember this. I definitely remember this at one point. So like, it was kind of like in that realm of things. But I think I 100% remember once he got like his name, and we'll get to that, but like that's like for sure when I like, oh yeah, I definitely remember this comic. I remember this one truly like affecting me. I remember it being like a big deal, like emotionally for me as well. Like I thought it was such a nice moment.
So I guess then you and I probably started reading this series originally back in the day at pretty much the same spot, right? Because for me, and I've talked about this before, the hypertension storyline that kicked off with issue 60, that was when I started reading the Superboy title monthly, and I read to the end of the series. And that's not too long after that Wildlands arc. So sounds like we kind of jumped on at similar points.
Yeah, for sure. So when you first told me it was going to be this, I was like, oh yeah, that's right in the midst of like when I was reading Superboy. And like when I went to go on the plane, I had pre-downloaded all the covers and I took a look at that first issue 50 cover, and I was like, oh God, it's like a Kazar thing, isn't it? And I like had this moment of like, all right, we're starting strong. And so I had that like, moment of like, but then as soon as I started reading it, I was like, oh my God, it's all the stuff that Kirby was doing in Jimmy Olsen. And it just like clicked. And I was truly, truly loving it.
Good. Sounds like you got more mileage out of that arc than I did, but I enjoyed most of the rest of what we read. Obviously, we just did our episode on the first Kiesel Grummett run where we're set in Hawaii and all of that. Had you ever read that run, either originally or more recently? Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious if you do read it to get your take, because I don't want to say the two runs are night and day, but there is a very clear line of demarcation, I feel like, between these two runs.
I noted that if they're anything like the issue where he returns to Hawaii, I want nothing to do with them.
I'm still sorting out my feelings on the shift in setting. Overall, I think it worked, and it was a great way to differentiate the two runs and do something a little bit different. And I think it did lead to some very solid stories. But I do still have a lot of affinity for that Hawaii setting and that initial setup for the series. And I guess the other thing is that not only do we have the shift in setting, but we really lose, with the exception of Double X, who of course is there at CADMUS. He was there in Hawaii. He's there at CADMUS. But for the most part, with limited exception, we lose Rex and Roxy Leach, and we lose Tana and Agent McCrea. So I think less so than the actual shift in setting. I think it was more just losing our supporting cast that bummed me out. That's probably what I had the bigger issue with.
It reads like a serial, whereas these were jumping into like Silver Age, Superman wackiness. Like that, it's not like Law and Order. I mean, it's obviously they're superheroes and stuff, but you have more grounded supporting cast, it seemed like, and that goes away for all of like the Jack Kirby floodgates opening. And this is like full high concept. You can do whatever you want, Jack Kirby.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of lay out some of the tentpole storylines of this run just to give folks some context, and then we'll dive deeper into it. But we have initially at the start of Kiesel and Grummet's return to the book, we have a 4-issue storyline, which we were alluding to earlier, The Last Boy on Earth, where Superboy wakes up without his memories in the Wildlands, this secret island where we have these genetically engineered advanced talking animals. So it's very much a take on Kirby's Commandy, yeah?
Yep.
The Last Boy on Earth. So we start there. You had mentioned as well the issue number 59, where Kal-El bestows Superboy the Kryptonian name Kon-El. When you look at the overall arc of this character across his 30-ish years, I mean, this is a seminal moment. This is when he's given a name beyond Subject 13, Superboy, or the Kid. This is Kon-El, and it will take some time, but eventually that will give rise to Connor, which is how we most commonly, I think, now refer to him. But that's when he gets his name Kon-El. So that's a single issue, but an absolutely pivotal one. Then we have the 5-issue arc that I've been mentioning a bunch already, Hypertension, where Superboy is sent on this mission throughout hypertime, and he contends with Black Zero, his evil adult doppelganger, who's bent on domination across all of these different realities. For my money, this is the best arc of the series. If someone was like, oh, I'm only going to read one arc, read Hypertension. It worked for me back in the day. I've revisited it now probably 3 times, I think, for this podcast for different episodes, and it still holds up. It's my favorite arc of the entire series. And then Kiesel and Grummet's last significant arc is the Evil Factory, and that's where we have the agenda. They take over Project CADMUS. Eventually, our heroes are able to rally and reclaim it, but we have a confrontation between Superboy and his evil clone Match, and the storyline culminates, spoiler alert, in the death of longtime love interest Tana Moon. And at the conclusion of the story, Superboy is left powerless. By the time Kiesel and Grummet depart the book a few issues later, he's been repowered, and then we're off into the Joe Kelly run, which we'll talk about later in the episode. But those are, I would say, kind of the major tentpoles of this stretch of issues. I guess let's start at the beginning. I mean, The Last Boy on Earth, like we said, it seems like you enjoyed this more than I did. My my enjoyment of this was fairly muted, I have to say.
Well, I think going into it, I always have not issues, but like I never enjoy like, an X-Men Savage Land stuff or in the DC universe, anything with Common D. And there's a couple of characters that pop up throughout these books where I'm like, oh man, they're really testing my love for DC in these. And so when I saw that he was like that cover where he's like shirtless with the sword,
the long hair.
Yeah. Christina peeked over my shoulder and she's like, is that Mowgli? Like, so, and then like reality shattering 50th, 59th issue, or was it 50th issue? So, all of that was just kind of like, all right, I'm doing this for the podcast. So I opened it and I'm reading it, and slowly it kind of dawned on me, obviously they honor him in the, the headline of the the book, and it starts to all come together that like, oh, this whole arc is about honoring like Jack Kirby weirdness. The island of Dr. Moreau kind of monsters and stuff, the Planet of the Apes-ness. It's all fun, but I enjoyed like it was like revisiting like old things that, like, oh, they went there and oh, they did, that was more what I found enjoyable about it. The arc itself is pretty standard of those types of stories that I also personally don't enjoy.
That's a great way of putting it, because I was thinking about this. It's not like I really have much of a critique of those issues. They just really weren't my taste. That's kind of what it comes down to. And Savage Land, though I'm not the biggest Marvel reader in the world, but that's a perfect comparison, because that's exactly how I felt whenever I encountered something like that on that side. It's just, I guess that type of setting doesn't really resonate with me all that much.
Like the old, like, adventure books, but like I enjoy adventure books. I enjoy sci-fi books. I enjoy like Indiana Jones, but something about like the like primitive man versus the animals thing, it just, I don't know. It almost read like, do you remember when the New 52 started and they did that book with like Vandal Savage and Etrigan and Demon Knights?
Okay.
It was almost the same kind of story structure as that. And I enjoyed Demon Knights because I enjoyed all of the characters. But you're introducing all of these like animals that have like bizarre names. Like, it just doesn't do it for me. But I love the artwork. I love all of the puns, and it really truly captured the style of Kirby. And I was going to send you this video either before or after, but it's someone explaining how Kirby does his paneling and how every panel like leads your eyes along. And that's one thing that I found lacking only in this first arc, really. It wasn't to that same caliber of like how Kirby would like have the gun pointing to the next panel, and then in the panel in the top right, he'd be having someone pointing downwards, and that was kind of missing from this, but I only have just learned about that, so now it's something I'm paying attention to more.
Gotcha. The other thing that I am aware of, and that I have to admit, is that, like I said, I don't have the background in Kirby's works, so I probably would have gotten more mileage out of this had I read his past work, and then to see all of those homages there and really get what they're referencing in a more direct way. I'm sure I would have appreciated it more, but kind of absent that touchstone and kind of being aware of it more in an academic sense, as opposed to, oh, I love those stories that are being referenced. It just didn't do as much for me. I think that's what a lot of it comes down to.
No, absolutely. And had I not had like that experience with the Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen run, like it would not be the same. Like this stuff really feels like Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. So if you want like a good start, you should probably do like that specifically. Just the Kirby run on that. You can get into the New Gods and everything else, but all of this truly references like that part of it.
I could see myself embarking upon that reading project. I could see myself maybe even doing a little episode on it. So I'll go file that away. After that business is settled, we have a couple of issues in Paris where Superboy accepts a mission from Guardian to track down this genetic anomaly, Grok, the living gargoyle. And there's an agent of the Agenda who's trying to track it down as well. And I do believe it's in these couple of issues. A lot of this is blurring together, but I believe it's in these couple of issues where we find out that the Contessa, the ex-wife of Lex Luthor, is now running the Agenda, and she'll come back in a big way in that Evil Factory arc, which I don't know. I think I just totally forgot that this was a thing with her. So that was a pleasant surprise. I was like, oh, she was over in this book too. So that was neat. And then the other big thing in these couple of issues in Paris, we meet Hex. We meet this supermodel who gets scarred on the face and then starts experiencing these blackouts, during which she seemingly conjures or is inhabited by the spirit of Jonah Hex and starts speaking in his way, and even the font of her lettering changes. And she'll come back for the Evil Factory arc as well, and she has a role to play in that. But what was your take on Hex? I had never, again, I guess back in the day, I read her in that Evil Factory arc. No memory of it. I mean, those were
Yeah.
not issues I had revisited in 20 plus years. So this was like brand new to me. What was your take on this version?
So there was a lot of me like doing like research during this where I was like, does this character still exist? Did they exist beforehand? Are they a Kirby creation? Are they a new creation? So I was constantly looking stuff up during this run. And she's only in this Superboy run. And I truly like, I know it might be silly, but I really liked something about this character. I just wish like the delivery and the creation of her worked. Something was off about it. Like Superboy flies in and he's the one who gets cut, but then it cuts to like Duplex and he's like saying that, oh, I must have gotten it wrong. And it maybe it was like something happened in like translation during production, but it all didn't flow right to me.
Yeah,
Did
no,
you catch that? Or
yes, I did. I definitely did a double take. I mean, I chalked it up to. So we find out over the course of most of the swath of issues that we're talking about here that I always said double X, but I like your double X more
I don't know if
elegant
it's right or not.
But we find out that he's being manipulated by the gene gnome, and slowly influencing, corrupting, and then basically outright taking over a double X by the time we get to that Evil Factory arc. I chalked it up to that. I mean, my read on it was that it actually was Hex who got scarred. Double X just saw it as Superboy because of this manipulation that was already happening. But because obviously Hex is the one who ends up with the scar.
Yeah,
so
of course, and that makes sense.
That's what I chalked that. But it's really not that clear.
It didn't like I had to go back and forth a couple times, and I don't do that often in comics. And I was just like, no, wait, did he get it? But no, she clearly, it was very confusing, the delivery on it. But I truly enjoy the character. I think it's really kind of fun to have this, supermodel possessed by one of the ugliest DC like characters that is also kind of like Psylocke. She has those energy bullets, and I think it's a fun character. I know that they have updated. So I read that they've updated that concept, and now there's Jonah Hex's great great granddaughter, Ginny Hex, and she has like a trunk of his items, and she does like the Western thing. So they've updated that concept. So I'm interested in like following up on that. But I really liked the character. I thought it was fun.
Yeah, it's fun. I guess I'm of two minds. Part of me says, oh, whether it's Ginny Hex version that you just mentioned or this one here, I'm like, oh, it's kind of a cool idea. But then there's another part of me that's like, do we need a modern day version of Jonah Hex? Just do stories with him in his own time.
Yeah, or like do a Man Out of Time thing for him. But I do really I like the it's carrying on that DC like lineage thing. They're trying to figure out a way to bring this character and leave him in his era, but still honor that, lineage.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And then from there, we segue right into the following issue where Superboy officially becomes an agent of CADMUS. You find out at the end of that Paris two-parter that Guardian essentially had an ulterior motive, sending him on this mission, wanted to prime him to make him this offer of working for CADMUS. And Superboy takes him up on it. We have this business about the government looking into CADMUS, a little bit of oversight and making sure that their money is being spent correctly. And they bring in Mickey Cannon to run things. I like this character, and I think you really see in the following couple of issues, there's a two-parter called Demolition Run, where we actually get a return visit from Roxy, and she's in trouble. She's entered this race to try to win money to help her dud of a father. But Mickey actually helps her. She steals the whiz wagon, and he could just bring her in, but he doesn't. He enters the race with her. And so I liked getting to see that side of him pretty early on. And when we talk about the Joe Kelly run, we'll talk even more about the government bureaucracy side of CADMUS, because they get into that even
seems
more.
Like his wheelhouse for sure.
But I guess overall, and like I said, I think this is one of the major headlines of this run of theirs, the second run of Superboy becoming an agent of CADMUS. Do you like him in this role and in this setting? Did this setup generally work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see him any other way. Like, I always feel like the two are so intrinsically tied just because of my entryway into it. Like, Superboy was always part of CADMUS to me. The villain in like long form stories, like, something like Dragon Ball, always gets converted. So even if Cadmus starts out bad, then you learn more about them and you work with them and you become part of it. And there truly is this, like, with this version with Connor, like, am I going to destroy the multiverse or am I going to be Superman?
Yeah.
And I think that being a part of Cadmus, he's more easily faced with, questions of faith in that.
No, that's a good point. It's funny because as I was reading it, I kept coming back to this idea of like, oh, they could have had their cake and ate it too. They could have made it that he's going on missions for Cadmus, but he's still primarily based in Hawaii. But I think ultimately they could have done that. But I'll argue against myself because I do think ultimately this was the right call. I think having that shift, I think, was important. And over the course of these 100 issues, to go from Hawaii to Cadmus to ultimately, stay tuned to the end of this episode, Calvin Gardens, where he becomes a building superintendent. You see him change settings a number of times, but before ultimately landing on the front porch of Jonathan and Martha Kent. And so I do kind of think it's important to have that movement, even though I did at times long for Hawaii and even more so for that supporting cast. But when you talk about kind of more of these existential questions that come up, that maybe that the setting helps explore, I'm really jumping ahead, but I don't want to forget this because this was, to me, like really crystallized a lot for me about the character. When we get to the climax of the Evil Factory storyline and Superboy's fighting Match, who looks exactly like him, and even has a more advanced power set, so he is a better version, so to speak, of Superboy. And they're fighting, and Superboy is essentially saying, like, you can't be me. And what Superboy says, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, I don't have parents. I don't have memories. All I have is what I am. And it's who I am, not you, as he punches Match. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah. And this came up in our last episode as well. Like, why exactly is Superboy doing what he's doing? Right. And we do get at this notion of that it's important to him that he one day becomes Superman. But I think that moment with Match really helped articulate it even more, just about what this kid's all about. And it just, I don't know, it just kind of hit home. It's like, yeah, if you don't have any of those other things, being Superboy is it. And so that's why it's so important to him. So I really like that moment.
Yeah.
The other big addition that we get with the shift to Cadmus is the arrival of Dr. Serling Roquette.
Yep.
This 16-year-old geneticist who's this prodigy, and she begins working at Cadmus. Now, I feel like the romance between them was really a non-starter. There were hints at it. It ultimately just kind of fizzles out. And actually, there are 3 fill-in issues written by Jay Farber that come in between this run and the start of the Joe Kelly run. Mm-hmm. And in those issues, I just kind of skimmed through them. But Superboy basically is like, I don't see you that way, or I'm not ready for, essentially just kind of pumps the brakes on it. So it never really goes anywhere. However, I was very happy with the setup of this character and potential relationship, that she was actually age appropriate, because we talked a lot, and I won't belabor the point or rehash that, but we talked a lot about how every single love interest of his in the beginning of the series was significantly older. Knockout certainly was a very extreme case, but even Tana Moon, like the difference between 23 and 16 is like, it's not just the number of years, but it's those specific ages. And it was just kind of a baffling choice to have all of the love interests. I guess I did rehash it after all. But anyway, it was very refreshing here, because this was exactly what I was longing for in that first batch of issues. It's like someone his age, and they accounted for it, that she was this prodigy. She skipped all these grades. I don't know how much I loved her character, so to speak, but it definitely fit if we're now in the Cadmus setting to have someone in that role. So, overall, I liked, maybe I didn't love the execution as much, but I like the setup of this character.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like such an earnestness to all of this like batch of issues where he's back in Cadmus and they're kind of cleaning house, and they're kind of like kicking out some of the elements of Jack Kirby they don't want, like the Newsboy Legion. They're like,
the directors and their younger clones. Yeah.
So like, I understood why they were doing it, but it was also cool to like that they even cared to reference them. They didn't have to do any of that. They didn't have to reference Newsboy Legion. They didn't have to have Guardian. They didn't have to do, the Harrys, or use the, oh my God, what is the name of the vehicle?
The Whiz
I should have written
Wagon.
that. The Whiz Wagon, which was what they used in, Jimmy Olsen. Like that was specifically one of the means of travel. And so they didn't, but they did. And they like gave you like a reasonable goodbye before they brought in like their new cast. And like, this is who you're going to be seeing from then on. It like reminds me like, oh, I should kind of get back to doing my New Gods run. I gotta go start up Orion again.
Yeah, well, hey, look, if this if this kind of relights that fire, that's a cool thing.
Yeah. And then I love me some wacky races. So that was just, whereas I don't like the like jungle stuff, wacky races, I'll do anything like that. Mad Max, wacky races, that stuff's always fun.
Yeah, Demolition Run was fun. I was happy to see Roxy back. And like I said, I think it showed you something about Mickey very early on, which I appreciated. So I know we're going relatively quickly through at least some of these issues, but I really want to get to the next one, which is 59, which was your first issue. And this is the one where he is given the name Con-El. What I did not remember was where this intersected with the Superman titles. This was during the King of the World storyline in the late 90s when, as it turns out, Superman is being influenced by the villain Dominus.
Oh,
right? But the way it
okay.
manifests is he devotes himself to being the world protector 24/7. He abandons his Clark Kent identity. He sets up that video array in the fortress, and that's what you see here. And they don't beat you over the head with it in this issue, but Superman is not quite himself. He's definitely, I feel like, a bit more stern or severe than normal.
That's also what he feels like in Jimmy Olsen.
Okay.
So he's very much like a very stern father, even though the book is like Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. Jack Kirby played with that a little bit, where like he started making Jimmy kind of take the reins in their friendship and relationship. But Superman was very much like, Jimmy, you're just a kid. Let me handle this. Like, and it really felt like almost like I'm continuing that story. Like this is that same Superman.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, this was just a really fun one to revisit, a seminal moment in the character's journey. Superman hooks Superboy up to this virtual reality experience, and he relives some key moments in Kryptonian history. And essentially we get this backstory about a Kryptonian who helped out Van-El, and then the family essentially like adopted him, made him an honorary L. They were essentially like cousins. And in the present day, after this experience is over, like I said before, Superman bestows Superboy with this name Con-El, which an anagram of clone. I mean, obviously not with a C, but I cannot take credit for that. I saw that in a Reddit thread and I was like, what?
No way. You should have taken. I would have believed it.
No, I'd never take credit for something I didn't think of myself. But yeah. So I mean, I don't know what memories did this bring back? Like, how did you feel revisiting this? What stands out to you?
I know that the art wasn't the same team. I looked and it was like Dusty Abel, I think was the name of the artist, and the art was so like 90s. It kind of is how I imagine Kyle Rayner would draw comic books. It was like like so specifically like 90s comics that it just kind of gave me that vibe. And I really enjoyed the art. There was like a panel that I want to just call out, and it's Dr. Verkett talking about the Brian Setzer Orchestra to impress Guardian, and then Superboy thinking about the Titanic. And I can't think of a more 90s panel than that. And like I didn't notice him thinking like in Impulse thought bubble about like the Titanic. And like I showed Christina just like the Brian Setzer like wording, and I pulled it back and I was like, oh my God, he's also thinking about Titanic. And then I do see what you guys were talking about in the last episode. Like, why is Guardian entertaining hanging out with this 16-year-old? Like, I know he like very kindly puts her down, but there is a lot of like strange things throughout this arc like that.
Oh yeah, because Serling has a big crush on Guardian.
Mm-hmm. And she's like, you should come back to like my quarters and we can spend time. And he's like, I'll think about it. And I was like, no, you shouldn't.
Yeah, like the appropriate response is, I'll meet you in the commissary and we can discuss it there. Like that's. You know what I think struck me the most was just the final page of issue 59.
Yes.
Superboy, I think he even has tears.
Yeah,
He's like, I have a name.
Stream. Yeah, it's such a good, like, I like showed Christina and I was like, look, he's like, that panel stuck with me, I think, for so long. And I think that's what initially attracted me to the character, was just like that pure, simple, like, I have a name. Like,
I said this last time, but it remains true. I know Superman didn't ask to be cloned, and it takes time to build trust and whatnot. And there's all this business about Superboy learning that Clark is Superman while he's in hypertime. And then there's an issue of Superboy where he goes to talk to Superman about it and kind of hints around about it. Then there's that issue of Superman by Loeb and McGinnis where he goes to the farm and talks to Clark and kind of hints about it. And then finally in Sins of Youth, when Clark is rendered a youth, he confesses, I'm actually Clark Kent. And Superboy's like, yeah, I already knew. There's all this business, and all to say that I get why it took time for Superman to like really bring him in and whatnot. But the thing that I just keep coming back to, it's like, man, like this kid was just on his own. I mean, yes, he had his supporting cast, but Rex Leach is certainly not any sort of paragon of virtue to be looking after anyone. And yes, Double X was there, but he's also there on behalf of CADMUS. It's just one of those things where we care about this character. You feel for the kid, and it takes so long before he gets a name. And it's not until the final issue of the series where Superman's like, oh, maybe you should live with Mom Pa Kent. So I just, you want these things for him, and and to have a moment like that, it really meant a lot.
Yeah. I mean, like, kind of put yourself in Clark's shoes. You suddenly have this younger version of you that isn't quite you. It's not Kryptonian even, and it's it's an it's a clone, and it's made by people who violated you. Like, of course you're going to be kind of hands off for it for a while, and then I think it shows how much Superman cares in his character, that even in the midst of becoming Superman 24/7, that he took the time to do this for, like, he thought it was important for the world, because he's not thinking about himself in these times. He's Superman. He's only thinking about what's important for the world. And he thought it was important for the world for Connor to have Con-El as his name.
Yeah. And we'll talk about how he eventually takes the civilian identity of Connor when I do our Teen Titans discussion next time. But yeah, this was a huge moment. And then we get to hypertension. Now,
yes,
I guess what drew me to this initially back in the day was this was hot on the heels of The Kingdom, which introduced the concept of hypertime. And we've talked about this in other episodes, but just this notion that there's just an infinite number of alternate realities. Shout out to our late great comic book shop in Scarsdale, New York. Anytime I see alternate realities, I'm like, yes. But that's introduced there. And I've lamented this fact before, and I'll do it once more here. This arc and that Walter West saga in Flash are, to my knowledge, I believe, really the only significant explorations of the hypertime concept back then. And now more recently, they've brought back the idea of hypertime. It's part of DC's divine continuum and all that bullshit. But anyway, I always felt like it was a missed opportunity. I always thought it was an intriguing concept. And so at the time, it just grabbed me. And even just the cover of issue 60 of Superboy strapped to the nuclear missile. It's like, oh my God. So it really,
I very much
grabs
remember
your
that
attention.
one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, what an intro. You have Big Barda of anybody like popping in and dropping off this doppelganger who's having visions of Kingdom Come and the death of Superboy. Like, what an intro. Like, that's a way to like say that we're here. This is the arc.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you like you said, you start off with this doppelganger of Superboy dying, but warning of this coming blackness, which we'll come to learn is Black Zero. And he's wearing this jacket that, coupled with the nuclear energy, is able to access hypertime. And only Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are aware of this. So it really becomes this very secret mission that they're sending Superboy on that he can't tell everybody about. So multiple angles to this story. And then over the course of these few issues, he's bouncing from reality to reality. There's one where Batman and Superboy are a team. There's another one where it's an all-female Justice League. Another one where he and Knockout are partners. And we've been mentioning the character of Black Zero. I really did like the backstory that's established here, that out of all of the Superboys across Hypertime, you know, in virtually every instance, it's like we experienced in our reality where he escapes before the maturation process is complete. And so he's a teenager. But in Black Zero's reality, he was aged to maturity. So that's one, you know, very clear line of delineation. But also in Black Zero's reality, Superman never came back. But the people of his world never accepted him, and they turned on him and CADMUS and clones. And so that became the motivation, right? He goes from reality to reality, and wherever CADMUS is sort of under threat or under scrutiny, that's when he makes his move, and he abducts the Superboys of each reality and places them in stasis and takes over those worlds. He's also collecting the Paul Westfields of all of these realities. Yeah, I mean, I found it to be a very satisfying arc to see twists on familiar characters and concepts. And just for him to be on this journey, he encounters the essentially pre-crisis Clark Kent Superboy, who he had originally met in that 0 Hour issue way back in the beginning of the series. And like I said, that's where he learns that Clark is Superboy. So just a ton of fun stuff. What stood out to you? What do you want to talk about with this arc?
Well, I love the Harrys. They, to me, like, for them to pop up in something is always fun to me now that I know who they are from Kirby stuff. They're just like Robert Anton Wilson and Buckminster Fuller, and like that ideal of the 60s, like the science hippie is just very fun characters. I couldn't help but think about, this is going on a different tangent, but how DC kind of wings it with science sometimes. I felt very reminiscent of your critique of Flashpoint, where, you know, Batman electrocutes Flash, where you have the three most important DC characters telling this child, please step into the nuclear bomb. This felt like a Dan DiDio plot to get rid of Connor and Nightwing.
No, fair. I mean, the notion that it had to be Superboy because they have this jacket and it's only keyed to his DNA, it's like, okay. But then, yes, when you add in this component of we need such an immense source of power, it's like, well, it can only be a nuclear missile. Just strap them to it. Yeah.
And then I also like, I love the Super Robin and like how we're getting like that like 70s kind of Batman in there, and the two of them together. But Superboy calling Robin Blood just the other Superboy Blood just got me. I started cracking up. Very 90s.
Yeah. No, it was good. I mean, I was just really just a ton of fun, and to see the Superboys work together to combine their tactile telekinesis and use it against Black Zero. The move that Black Zero uses on Superboy to keep his feet in place and immobilize him, Superboy himself would then go on to use that in subsequent issues. So it's like, oh man, he's learning. Which this is great.
And Black Zero, like it goes to show that the goatee is truly a sign of evil.
Oh yeah. Speaking of the visuals though, I mean, we share a love of Power Rangers, and there was like shades of the Gold Ranger. To me, I kind of had that in my head a little bit. I'm like, oh, this is great. Speaking of doing research with this, in recent years, right, and we're going to talk more about Connor's return to continuity after he was erased with the New 52. And obviously there was a different Superboy during that time, which we won't be talking about in this event. But in recent years, Superboy has popped up in a couple of titles outside of the super titles. And one of them is the Titans United miniseries from a few years ago. And in that one, this was more of a skim, so I might be a little shaky on the details, but essentially at some point Superboy is mind controlled, manipulated, influenced in some way, and he adopts the Black Zero persona. It's not the exact same design. It's given a pretty cool update. Yeah. At first when I saw it, I was like, they bring Black Zero back? But no, it was Connor under the influence. But just the idea, the concept got another go, which I thought was kind of cool. And then while we're here, I just want to mention this too, that I know we've mentioned Match. We'll come back to him in a second, but Superboy also appeared relatively recently in a Suicide Squad ongoing series. And I mean, not to spoil it, but after X number of issues, it's revealed that the character we thought was Superboy was actually Match. Like Amanda Waller couldn't get Connor, so it was Match. And then obviously the real Superboy shows up and they go head to head and whatnot. But I just wanted to mention these two here because as we're talking about Black Zero, we're talking about Match. those characters, or at least the idea of those characters, got another go relatively recently.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to keep diving into newer stuff. I've been enjoying some of the stuff that DC's been doing lately.
Yeah, right on.
Wonder Woman at one point, she's like explains where Superboy is when they're like, "Where's Superboy? We need him here at CADMUS." And she's like, "Oh, he's off exploring dangerous frontiers. For all she knows, they blew him up."
I know. It's not great. I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say, oh, they treat this kid like cannon fodder, but I mean, they really just blasted him into the unknown. And it's so weird too. Right after Superman gave him his Kryptonian name, it almost, obviously this was not the intent, but it's almost, you can almost look at it in a twisted way. Like, did Superman know this was coming? And he was trying to like do something nice for this kid before he kicks it. Obviously that's not the case, but then you would expect maybe Superman to be a bit more sensitive. It's like now there's this enhanced bond between them, but they just strapped that kid and sent him off.
Or Superman went to Batman one day and was like, "Listen, I've got this clone situation," and Batman's like, "I've got you."
Yeah,
and he's like, "We'll strap him to a nuclear bomb, send him on a mission."
Yeah, pretty much. Like we said, I really did like the second meeting between Khan and the Clark Superboy.
Yeah, I really love that too. That I wish I've been living vicariously through you of your Superboy issues, but I do have a question since you're more experienced with this one. Is Superboy just pointing at a rock and going, "Here, come under this rock. I have a pathway to my house"? Is that like a normal thing?
Oh no, the tunnel to the house, that's a thing. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
How, is there multiple, or is it like one specific rock?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not positive. I think it's just one. Although I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if he has multiple entry points, but I believe it's just one. But yeah, that's fully a thing. Like that's so funny. So that's how he avoids people seeing Superboy flying to and from the Kent house. They just goes underground. Yeah, so he's like in the woods, he goes underground, and then boom, that's it.
That's fun.
Yeah.
No, I just that was just very like silly to me, and I was like, this is such like a 50s.
Yeah. Speaking of 50s, well, it's so funny. So to disguise Khan, Clark dresses him up in his own clothes, and it doesn't work. And he's like, "I'm not really the Richie Cunningham type." And I love too. I mean, the way we well, I guess when he sees the Kents, that gives it away. But then they assume that Khan is also Clark in his reality. So, that takes them all back. And, obviously they realize how distinct this version is, but it was cool. That 0 Hour issue, I think, was one of the strongest issues of the series. And so to come back around to that and have the quote unquote original Superboy in the mix for this event was great. Oh, this was the other thing I wanted to say. I'm not the biggest fan of Match. Match doesn't really do much for me. He's just this cop. He's not a Bizarro, right? Which is its own thing. He's just this identical, slightly elevated, powered version of Khan. But Black Zero, like there's meat on the bone there. The fact that
for sure
he has the backstory that we talked about, and he's older and all of that. And he, unlike Khan, who wants to get as far away from Paul Westfield, because at this point in time, that's who he thinks his DNA comes from. We haven't gotten to the Jeff Johns, Lex Luthor retcon yet. But Black Zero, kind of reveres this guy. So, you really see this stark contrast between the two of them. Like I like him as his villain. And also, we're still at the point in time where Superboy can't age. His aging is locked at 16. So to be confronted with the older version of himself, it just works on a number of levels. Like I said, it made me think of the Gold Ranger. So I love the design.
Yeah, no, he really is like, I think Superboy's, because I truly remember him as like, I didn't remember Match as much as I remember Black Zero, like as I was getting back into this run, and I was really excited to encounter that character again, and to now have like context and understanding of like what it's like. It really, really, really does work. And the Westfield stuff, I have an interesting headcanon. He gets tossed into the hyper time, he gets erased from time, and there you go. He slowly fades away as the reality has to rewrite and fit in a new donor.
I like that.
Yeah, that's how I saw it. As soon as that happened, I was like, oh, okay. So he's getting erased from time, and then reality has to like rewrite itself.
Oh, I like that. I haven't recorded the Jeff Johns Teen Titans episode yet. I think I'm going to be, not that I was going to be harsh, but I think I'm going to be even kinder now. I like that. I like that. Yeah, because there's all of this business. What is it? The Hyperium? The substance?
Yeah.
The substance of hypertime, and he jumps into it, right? Or falls into it.
And like something happens where I think he gets knocked into it.
And then every version of him is erased. Oh, and then I like your theory that then time has to rewrite itself, and that's how you end up with Lex. Oh, I like that.
To avoid a paradox, they have to fill it in.
Ah, very nice. And then circling back to the challengers, they're all. They save the day because they convince Metron. You've been studying all of these realities where Black Zero is taking over. You need a control group essentially, so now you need to see what happens without his intervention, and that's kind of enough to get him to shut down Black Zero. He like throws a mother box or something on him, and he's like incapacitated. And then he sends him home.
Metron is pretty. You just have to reason with him. Usually, you can't I don't think anyone's fought Metron, as far as I'm aware, in DC Comics history. It's usually someone talking or tricking him or something along those lines.
Yeah. So then we get back here. The aftermath issue has CADMUS realizing they need a backup. Right, they almost lost Superboy, and so they, conduct this search and go through, many members of the DC universe, ultimately landing on Heatwave, the reformed Flash villain. So we have that. I'll be honest, the next few issues here, we have a 2-parter where we return to the Wildlands, and then we also have a Day of Judgment tie-in with Etrigan. I'm not going to lie, these were kind of skims for me, so I don't really have much to say, but I welcome any thoughts you have.
And I really like Guardian and Heatwave. Out of all of these issues, I like how cold Guardian is to him, and like the first time he hard-nosed Heatwave, I was like, oh man, Heatwave doesn't deserve that. It was just a good moment, and I liked how that all plays out.
Yeah, Jim Harper, former cop, right? So it definitely takes a while for him to warm up, no pun intended, to Heatwave.
Yeah.
I like that dynamic as well. Next up is the issue that you were mentioning earlier, issue 69, where Superboy returns to Hawaii to revisit his former home. And he picks up Crypto, who had been in the care of Hillary, his former classmate. He returns to the compound, this place he had purchased where he and his crew lived while they were there. That's now abandoned. And he has some line about, something to the effect of, you wouldn't know anyone had ever been here. It's a very bittersweet return. He encounters a new hero of Hawaii who the people seem far more taken with, unlike Superboy, who uses his tactile TK to blow up the street. And they're like, what are you doing? He also visits Knockout, which is, I believe, unless I'm blanking here, her last appearance in the series, where she's, still incarcerated. And he, tries to get through to her. She's not having it. So it sounds like, though, you were not as much of a fan of this issue.
No, I did. I enjoyed the issue. It was just this weird Hawaiian 90s linguistics that they were doing. I felt like I had to. I don't know if it was accurate. It kind of felt like the South Park episode where you have all the boomers being mahalo. It was very it didn't feel genuine. It didn't feel, and I think that kind of got to me. But I really enjoyed the issue, and coming home is always weird. It's always kind of like the Twilight Zone, so it's never the welcome back you expect. And I think it's important for people and kids who are reading this to learn about that, and for characters themselves who are driven to experience that. I've been there. I've come home and I'm where is everybody, and why is it this way, and where is this building? And it's such a strange, it's the place, but it's moved on without you. And I think that's important for a character to experience.
I agree. Yeah, it really had a bittersweet quality to it. And I think I'm glad it's only one issue, but I'm really glad that they devoted the real estate to this, because after Superboy gets back from his Wildlands adventure at the beginning of this run that we've been talking about, everyone in Hawaii has gone their separate ways, right? We had talked about this at the end of the last episode, but Roxy went off to try to help Rex. Tana took a job elsewhere and left. Double X was called back to CADMUS. So, his whole support system is just gone. And I'm of course, that makes it easier for him to then take that step and move over to CADMUS. But to have that bit of closure, to go back and to be met in most instances with the absence, there's a part of me that's I wish our cast had been there. But no, I think to your point, there's something about the fact that they're not there. That compound is just empty. There's something to be said for that. And I think that's an important step for him to, fully move on. So I'm glad that we did that. I guess the last thing I wanted to say about issue 69, the return to Hawaii, just with Knockout. I don't know that I've read many, if any, of these stories, but Gail Simone would repurpose Knockout as in the Secret Six, right? And she's the lover of Scandal, right? Savage.
Yep.
Right. And then ultimately, I guess, spoiler alert, but the Knockout is eventually killed in that run, right? Or in the Issue of Birds of Prey, I believe.
I don't recall. I haven't read that in so long, but I do that's where I knew Knockout from. I don't recall her from the Superboy run. I do remember her more from Secret Six.
Yeah.
Where King Shark also gets some play.
Ah, right on.
Yeah.
I'm not invested enough, and I don't know that I'll be making my way over to Secret Six, but nice to know that the character at least got, another spin, even if she ultimately met a permanent end. And I do believe it was an issue of Birds of Prey where that happened.
Yeah.
All right. So then we get Kiesel and Grumman's last big arc, the Evil Factory. Honestly, man, I think they should have left with 75. I like those last 4 issues that they do where Superboy's powerless and he's got that gauntlet that creates a Guardian-like Superboy shield, and he's got the Legion flight ring, and he mixes it up with Cossack the Slaver, this intergalactic being, and he's got to free all the slaves on the ship and whatnot. I mean, it was fine, but I don't know. I felt like the Evil Factory arc was kind of a strong note, and I think that was a better exit ramp for them.
This is one of those things where I wonder if they wanted to go grander and they weren't allowed to. Like, this is something I wish I would have learned. I knew more about the behind the scenes stuff. But it really does feel like Darkseid and Granny Goodness. And it should have been them.
Yeah.
And in keeping with Jack Kirby, that would have made sense, because there's one thing that I take issue with in the Evil Factory, and it might just be because they are clones, because I think they do dissolve. But Simeon and Mokari are apocalyptans. So once again, they also pop up in Jack Kirby, and they're one of the first, Clarion calls that Darkseid is coming, it's the first 2 of the Apocalypse characters that you encounter before you get into Forever People, where you then encounter Granny Goodness and that reign, and then they all kind of slowly get introduced in Godfrey until you finally meet Darkseid from Out of the Shadows. And that just would have made more sense. I know we're skipping ahead, but Cossack the Slaver truly feels and almost looks kind of like Darkseid. And I feel like that's what this probably was supposed to be, and I don't want to put, that's just the vibe I'm getting. That's that's all alleged anecdotal, not true evidence,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that, I know that would have grabbed me more given my affinity for those Fourth World characters, but also, yeah, I mean, as a finish to this Kirby-infused run, this 30-issue stretch that we're talking about, yeah, man, I feel like that would have been a far more appropriate finish.
Those 2 characters don't exist anywhere else. I looked them up. They're only in those issues, and that's it. And so to me, it just makes sense that a depowered Superboy going up against Darkseid and Granny Goodness just makes sense.
Yeah.
So that'll be my headcanon for that, even though that's not what it is.
No, good point. But yeah, like we said, so essentially in the Evil Factory, you have the Agenda, who had been introduced in the Ron Mars run that we talked about last time. They infiltrate and take over CADMUS, and it really starts with the Gene Gnome who manipulates Double X, and they replace the key CADMUS personnel with clones. And there was one of the issues where it seems like Superboy and Mickey and Guardian and Sterling, they've escaped, and then Guardian gets killed, but eventually they realize that they're in this mind maze and they're able to shock themselves out of it. But I thought that was a neat one. So on the Agenda front, you mentioned Simeon and Mokari. Of course, we have Amanda Spence from the Agenda. We find out that Paul Westfield was her father. They're just kind of thrown in there, and then
there was a couple of weird moments. It felt rushed and disorganized. At the beginning of issue 73, we had a bit of a disorienting start. I thought it would pick up right where Superboy's with Tana, but it seems like they wanted to fit in introducing the Point Men, who we never get back to.
So I think overall, I think Kiesel and Grumman really did do a good job of balancing the Evil Factory with Sins of Youth.
Yes.
It was still a very delicate line to walk. And I I mean, ultimately, I wish that they could have just told their own story in full. I think, kind of having to tie into an event is not always the the recipe for success, but I think they handled it as best as possible. But yeah, I think so essentially, I guess their way through this was Contessa, right? Where essentially she has multiple avenues to achieving her aim. So on the one hand, she's manipulating public opinion against the young heroes of the DC universe, Young Justice in particular. She's the one who's pulling the strings on Clarion, who initiates the whole Sins of Youth swapping ages business. And then over on this side, she's taking over CADMUS. And I guess her ultimate aim, which really combines Sins of Youth and the Superboy title, is to discredit and eliminate the existing heroes, young heroes of the DC universe, and then replace them with this quote unquote master race that they're building over at the Evil Factory. So, I mean, again, even as I'm saying it, it's like, yeah, I don't know, it lines up, it fits.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit much, but it does still work. But that's that's essentially what's going on here.
Got it. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Clarion, so anytime he pops up.
Clarion, bum, 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 the Witch Boy.
Oh, yeah.
Bum, bum, bum.
I am a big fan. So, you know me. That's where we differ, is I love all the magic stuff, so... Any Clarion, I love that character.
I mean, look, if there's any magic, I'm going to be on board with. I mean, I do Sins of Youth and Young Justice as a whole. It does hold a special place. So, maybe there's some common ground on that front.
But this was good. I like it all comes together. All the threads that were started from the wild area to now, it came together really nicely. And I agree, 75 really feels like that definitive end piece. But I think they just had to repower him before they before they put him back in the toy box, like I said.
Like you always say. Yeah, I know. So, like I said, we have this connection point. There's issue 74 of Superboy is the official conclusion of the 5-part Evil Factory arc. It is also a tie-in to Sins of Youth. And you look at the cover, you've got the little Evil Factory title, and then you've also got the Sins of Youth. The culmination of all of this is that Superboy is aged up, right? Because with Sins of Youth, we have the young and older heroes of the DC universe swapping ages. At first, Superboy does not age up with the rest of his peers because of that locked cellular structure. But Serling is able to figure that out. And this is where Amanda Spence activates the necklace that the agenda had placed around Tana's neck, and it electrocutes her and kills her. And she had only just returned to the book, like an issue or two earlier, where Superboy's allies from the Wildlands, they had went off in search of Tana, and they found her in this biosphere in Alaska, where she had been imprisoned by the agenda. How did you feel about Tana's return and damn near immediate execution?
Yeah. I want to just fit in that the yellow look is no bueno for Match. Like whatever he turns into is
I know.
a good look.
I know.
It's awful. But oof, a lot happens at the end of that issue. We get the reversal of the Trapped at 16, like you said, and she gets fridged. I'm gonna say it. She immediately gets killed for his character development.
Yeah.
She didn't deserve that. And there was a way to stop it with all of those people there. And it's very cruel way. It's a very tragic death. And maybe that's why, I don't know anything about this character, but I know, and this is a great tip I've learned from a recent screenwriting podcast, is if you don't know how to, if people are receiving a character poorly, have other characters talk really nicely about that character. So all I know about Tana is everything that Connell has said about her. And so that made that extra tragic. So maybe I'm angry about it. Maybe I see it as fridging or too soon, because that's usually what death makes you feel. So
I hear you. So I knew she died in this arc. I honestly had forgotten, and I was disappointed by how quickly it happens after she returns and how almost nothing she has to do before that. That's the thing that kind of bugs me. It's if she had been a presence, as she had been in the first part of the series, I don't know if it had played out differently, but it's they basically just brought her back to electrocute her.
It's objectifying, and I hate to sound, too, it's objectifying because she's like the kiss trophy at the end, right? You're going to get her as this like trophy. And so instead of that happening, the villain at the end of the movie put the trophy into lava. Like that's like she had nothing to do outside of being a trophy for him to obtain. And yes, I think that that concept is tragic, that the thing that you're seeking ultimately ends up not mattering, but there are philosophical avenues that you can teach him that lesson on where you're not objectifying this woman further.
Again, I keep coming back to this idea that she was just like completely off the board. I mean, not that I would have wanted Serling to just be, subbed in for this, but it's like at least they were at the beginning of a potential relationship. She had stuff to do at CADMUS. If they were she could have, I don't know, done something or in the process of trying to escape death, maybe she achieved something for CADMUS, for Superboy, so that she's at least doing something.
She could have tried to take the necklace off Tana and it could have been Serling who gets it. And the same feeling would have happened. And it would have been like, she was a hero, and this is a character that does have things. Although I do have issue with her not telling Guardian about anything because Donovan's going to reveal her crush.
Yeah.
Like that feels very out of character to me. But other than that.
No, I agree. Okay. Fridging aside, it's like, all right, if you're going to do this, then what does it mean for Superboy? And in issue 75, and interestingly, 75 is, I think, the only instance in any of these Kiesel Grummet issues, I mean, unless I'm really not remembering, where we get an internal monologue. We actually get thought captions for Superboy, which I like. I like that. Yeah. But so you get a little bit more insight into how he's processing all of this. And he does talk about how Tana always wanted him to have a normal life, or at least some element of a normal life. And he was going to try to honor that, but he also needed to be himself. And at this point, he is powerless after he was aged back down to 16. At the conclusion of Sins of Youth, he was powerless. And he'll remain that way for the next few issues until Roxy Leach, possessed by this fiery alien life form, is able to power him back up. She says, "You haven't been getting enough sun," and boom. You know what was missing from that? What did they need to do? They needed to throw him in the sun. It works for Superman. It works for Superboy. But anyway, so in issues,
we're in space.
I know. God damn, what a missed opportunity. But with that issue 75, as Superboy is thinking about all of this, it's like, okay, I'm going to honor Tana by having this, some element of a normal life, but I also still need to be myself. And then that's what leads him to pursue the means to still be a superhero without his powers. Again, we got that gauntlet and the Legion ring and all that. But I don't know, what normal life does he pursue? Because after that, we get right into that Cossack the Slaver business. And then with the Joe Kelly run, he's at CADMUS. He's in a funk. He's just doing his Superboy thing. So I don't know. Like, I don't feel like there was really, I don't know that it really led to an actual change for him or development. I mean, right? I mean, I don't know. Do you feel otherwise?
No, I don't think that's what he needed. I don't think he needed like that normalcy. I don't think he's ever going to get that normalcy. I think if anything, like if you're going to give this character a happy ending, it would be that. But I don't even think he would be satisfied with that. He is like grown on pop culture. He's like this action-oriented, in the moment like character. I don't think that would ever work for him.
Well, he'll get a little bit of it in the final arc when he's the building superintendent. But no, I mean, like overall, I don't. Well, I don't know. I mean, by the time we get to the Jeff Johns run and he's going to Smallville High and whatnot, and he's got a full-on civilian identity. But I guess my point is, Superboy seems to think that's what Tana wants, and he's going to honor that. But it's like, I don't know. I don't think he does. So it's like, what's the point of this?
Yeah, I truly don't think he does in any way. He jumps right into, going to the Harrys to get the new like shield and duds and
t-shirt, a t-shirt and jeans.
Yeah,
funny enough, and red gloves. I mean, it's not the exact look that he'll have in the Jeff Johns era, but it's
pretty close,
or precursor to it. Yeah, I was like, oh man, yeah, his t-shirt and jeans, interesting.
Yep. And I don't I don't think that matters for him. I think it was that like fleeting thought, he's grieving, so he's having
Yeah.
all of these various thoughts, but he's like, I have to be me. He's a selfish teenager. Like that's ultimately what he is.
But I guess I just feel like, had that not been the case, then at least maybe that's a way to make her death mean something. If there's some sort of, it prompts something. But if it really doesn't, then the use of that character then just kind of, it frustrates me more.
Does he even bring her up through the next 4 issues?
I don't really think so.
Yeah, I think he's too in it about his power loss, and going to space, and he has too many distractions.
Obviously he feels the loss and they had been very close, but she, even though she wasn't dead before, she was out of his life. So yeah. I think there was an element of loss that he had already gotten used to some degree or another. Now, obviously her death is a far more extreme, different level of that, but you know what I mean? So so yeah, it's like, I don't know how much it really even added other than the shock of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. That to me, that was a bit of a misfire.
I know the last bit of that arc, the 676 through 79, like isn't that key, but I just wish that he felt some kind of danger during all of it. I feel like he's depowered, but we don't put him in any peril. He's still okay. Like he didn't get hurt. It all kind of worked out for him, and then Roxy repowers him, and we don't get any of like, oh, I can bleed. There wasn't that moment. There wasn't like,
yeah. I think some missed opportunities here. I really, not to belabor the point, but I think 75 would have been a perfect jumping off point for them.
Yeah.
Those last few issues, I think were not their strongest, but look, I mean, how many teams have 2 30-issue runs on the same title with a 2-year break in the middle? And both runs really do stand on their own and have their own vibe while still being overall consistent with each other. It's nothing to sneeze at.
No, I truly enjoyed it. I love the artwork. I love like all of the punny kind of writing that they do. There's like questionable choices, but like once again, like I'm not writing 30 issues.
Is there anything we didn't talk about with this 30-issue run that you wanted to?
We didn't get into tactile telekinesis, but
what the hell more is there to say about that?
I know. I think you've covered it plenty. But I do like it. I do think that like its ultimate form is kind of like what Dr. Manhattan can do, where he kind of like pulls the machinery apart and breaks it down. But Connor's not that smart yet. But I think that's like ultimately where that leads is like, he's got to kind of have his hand up or his foot touching the ground or touching something, and he can break it down to like the molecular structures. The concept is cool. It's there. It's just that he says it all the time, which makes it silly.
Yeah, that's it. That's the thing. But all right, man, this was a lot of fun. Oh, the last thing I just want to mention. So Kiesel and Grummet, while they do depart the title here, they do return. They tell a short story at the beginning of the final issue of the series, issue 100. It's a double X story where he is recounting his history with Superboy, and essentially questioning whether or not they still fit in each other's lives at this point. But it was nice to have them be part of that milestone final issue. They more than deserved it. I mean, they drove the bulk of this series and created the character. So I was happy to see that they got that return there. And then obviously too, with the return of Superman 30th anniversary special, they were able to tell one of the stories there with, because we got a revisitation with each of the 4 replacement Supermen, and they got to do a Superboy story. So, I enjoyed both of them. I know I had my fair share of critiques of these issues that we talked about, but I am a fan of those creators, and I will say until I'm blue in the face that I think Tom Grummet is one of the most underrated artists. I love his stuff. So
it's great.
Anytime they're doing anything and anything together and anything Superman or Superboy related, I'm always there for it.
Absolutely. That was such a fun thing to read. Thank you for thinking of me and for having me
man. I know how much you love
it.
I know how much you love Connor and your affinity for Kirby. So this was a no-brainer. So I thank you very much. Where do you want to direct folks?
Instagram, as always. I am on Blue Sky now, but I don't really use it too much. I'm not as active on the social medias outside of posting political things at this point. But new Kill Me Kate's still in the works, so that should be coming hopefully sometime this year. We're working on the album cover now. We're doing everything all together as a band still, so everything is very like, it's a process like democracy. So
Well, when the time comes, let me know because maybe we can debut a song or a part of a song, a preview on the podcast here.
yeah, hell yeah.
Right on. Well, thank you, Ralph. Thank you, audience. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break with Mike Sangregorio as we talk about the final two runs on this Superboy title. We'll be right back. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals. Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. And now, joining me to discuss the final 2 runs on the Superboy title, issues 83 through 93 by Joe Kelly and Pasqual Ferry, and issues 94 through 100 by Jimmy Palmiotti, Dan DiDio, and John McCrea, is our pal, returning guest, Mike Sangregorio. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about this.
Yes, I'm particularly curious to get your take on both of these runs, especially the Joe Kelly run, because you and I have talked a lot about Joe Kelly, especially his Action Comics run, over more than one episode on this podcast in the past. And I think it's more than fair to say both of these runs, especially that final run, those final 7 issues, not often talked about. I don't tend to encounter a lot of discourse about this tail end of the Superboy series. So I'm glad that we can shine a bit of a light on this and talk about it, right? Fair to say, I feel like these are a bit overlooked.
Yeah, I got Joe Kelly, Superman, Action, whatever it was, run when it was coming out. I love his Justice League run, his run on X-Men, all the different times he's written Spider-Man, including right now. I skipped these Superboy issues. I didn't even know they were coming out back in the day. And if I've gone back to them at all since then, they didn't stick with me. So, yeah, I was very happy to sit down to read to the end. I did not know John McCrea was the artist on that last part, and he is one of my favorite artists of all time. He is the artist on my favorite comic book of all time. So I could have read those without any words or any word balloons. That was a very pleasant surprise. But yeah, these 2 last arcs, I didn't know what to make of them. I knew nothing about them going in, and they were wild in good and bad ways, but definitely not what I was expecting.
I am really surprised that you had never read the Joe Kelly issues, because obviously you had read his action run, and this was around the same time. But look, it happens. We all have gaps, things that escape our sight.
If I had a guess, I would say it was probably just a money thing, because I remember, back in the day when you actually have to like budget comics, it's like, all right, I want to get this, and I'm already buying 22 issues of Spider-Man a week. So what else can I get? A Superboy? You know what? We're going to skip him. I'll come back to him one day. And then you never do, because no one ever reminds you that was a great arc you missed until here we are at 40. I'm reading the arc for the first time. But I will say the art on that book, Ferry, I love Ferry. I thought the 2 of them together was great. His design work, he can draw cosmic nonsense like no one. So that was really good. I was really happy to get that, especially with the Our Worlds of War tie-in stories.
Yeah, and look, the Superboy solo title, it started with Carl Kiesel and Tom Grummett, who carried over from the Adventures of Superman title. So the notion of taking creators from one of the main Superman titles and having them work on this book, there's precedent for it. So I think on paper, bringing Kelly and Ferry over to this makes all the sense in the world. We're now firmly in the part of this Superboy series that I read live as it was coming out month to month back in the day. And I remember not loving the Kelly run. I don't know that I could really articulate why, but I remember at the time not really connecting with it, not liking it as much as I wanted to, because as we've discussed many times, I love that whole era of the Superman books with Jeff Loeb and Joe Kelly. And over all these years, and especially in the years since starting the podcast, I've been keen to revisit the run. Because look, most of the stuff that I've revisited for purposes of this show, I've come away with a greater appreciation than I did the first time around, especially when I didn't really love something the first time around. A lot of times I've read it or reread it or rewatched it, and I'm like, oh, okay, I can enjoy it more now, or I at least get what they were going for. I have more appreciation for it. I gotta tell you, man, really, I think my initial instinct was correct and essentially has remained the same. I did not enjoy this run. It felt like a non-starter. It just kind of felt like it never really got going. It felt like we moved away from the setting and the supporting cast that had made the book and the character work. The most that I could say in terms of an arc is the off-panel death of Guardian that then leads to a cloned baby of him that ages at an accelerated rate. And then you have this whole government angle where they're trying to create an army of these proto-clones to use on the battlefield. And as you mentioned, we do have 3 tie-in issues to Our Worlds at War, big Superman event of the day. Superboy also gets a new look in this run in the first issue where he's in a bit of a funk. And once more, for the record, I love these creators. I love what they did over on Action Comics, but I just found this run and Superboy in particular in this like so obnoxious. I really found it pretty grating. I wish I had something more positive to say, but that was my gut reaction. How did you feel about these issues, especially going through them for the first time?
I didn't feel like I had missed anything. It's unfortunate. I love Kelly's dialogue. I love his characterization. I like the art, but yeah, it doesn't build to something satisfying. And whether that was because his schedule was already packed. A couple of these issues are co-written by Eddie Berganza. That's always a red flag for me. And then the run gets kind of hijacked by Our Worlds at War, which even if you like it or don't like it, doesn't matter. Suddenly you're in the middle of it and you're going to have to look up something somewhere because, that kind of is the whole thing. And then it all ends very abruptly and suddenly he's a super at a building in Suicide Slum, which has its own pedigree. But I will say a couple of things. I didn't think it was bad. I don't feel like I missed anything having not read it back in the day, but it was still time well spent. I loved the Guardian. I love the Guardian. I absolutely love the Guardian. I've read all his Golden Age comics. I read all the Silver Age ones when Jack brings him back for the Fourth World. And I always loved the idea that he was the kid's mentor in a lot of stories. I thought that was very well done. For those who don't know, the Guardian was a character that Kirby and Joe Simon created after they stopped working on Captain America when they went over to DC. That's why he's very similar. That's why he's often characterized in the same way. It's okay. It's there in the DNA. The difference is that instead of being a soldier, he was a police officer in what is now Metropolis and what is originally New York. So I love that character. And if you want to just give me an ongoing series featuring him, I would have been quite happy. I thought it was really cool here. The idea of him being a clone and choosing to be that and not choosing to be that is actually something from the comics that introduced CADMUS back pre-Crisis when it was called the DNA Project. So I thought those were all cool callbacks. And then one of my favorites was seeing Amanda from the agenda back as a cyborg, and I was like, I love this character. She, she's such a good arch enemy for him. She hates him, but at the same time, she has just this like aloofness to her. Like, no, you are a pile of DNA that I want to cut up and sell, and I do not think you're human, and I don't think anyone else should either. So I thought that was great. The other thing I love the character of Amanda Waller, regardless of what she's in. The great John Ostrander co-created her, and I was very, very happy to see her here as part of that President Lex thing where she becomes a cabinet member. Again, that President Lex thing, super, super prescient for what we're currently going through, and seeing Amanda Waller just show up at a random facility that receives, some government funding and is like, hey, you all work for me. You are going to die in space. I was like, yes, please. This is great. This came out 25 years ago, but it could have come out tomorrow. I thought that was all so good. And then the single issue, I think it's called War Letters, where you see three different interwoven stories of, one's the Guardian, I think one is Superboy, and I'm blanking on the third. Oh, it's Crypto, the real Crypto now, who I guess had been reintroduced by Jeff Loeb by that point. That issue was great. That was actually the one issue I had read before. I assume just because someone had recommended it to me, and that's written just solidly by Joe Kelly. So again, that really felt like him. That felt like him swinging for the fences. So there is a lot of good in there, but overall, it doesn't tell you a story. It just tells you a bunch of little ones. There's a character that was introduced at the beginning of the arc, the mysterious alien woman, right? And she seems like she's going to be a big deal, and then she never comes back. That annoyed me.
Yep. During an altercation, Superboy seems to, I don't know, pass through some dimensional rift or something and encounter this alien bar and this woman that's very intriguing to him, and he can't get her out of his head. And then that's it. And also in that issue, he has this insane power surge that disassembles all the guns in Los Angeles. And unless I missed it, I don't think they ever give an accounting for what that was about. I'm with you. I suspect there was some scheduling snafu at play. The fact that Kelly needed a co-writer at all for any of these issues, the fact that the run was 11 issues, the fact that it ends with a Joker's Last Laugh tie-in. Right. And as we're saying, just the fact that it gets swept up in Our Worlds at War and Joker's Last Laugh, it doesn't get a ton of time to really stand on its own, in fairness. Yeah. And credit where credit's due. What you highlighted, the Guardian of it all, that War Letters issue, and the government bureaucracy piece, those were, I would say that was the trifecta. Those were the three things that I liked the most. I mean, the thing that breaks my heart with Guardian is I wish they had made more of a meal out of that. Right. I know I mentioned before how his death happens off panel, and then later they see video footage of it, this battle with shrapnel. And I know the whole idea in that issue is that Superboy asks Guardian to go in his place to take on shrapnel. And then Superboy gets sent down to Florida to deal with this family of hillbilly metahumans. And when he comes back, he sees Guardian's shattered helmet. And he says, that was the day Guardian died. So it's like, oh, he went in his place. And then there's this big revelation. But I wanted more with Guardian. Like you, I have not researched the character or spent as much time with him as you have, but I've always loved the character. And yeah, I wanted more there. It didn't feel like it had the weight that it could or should have had. I love the War Letters issue because it was one of the, I guess really the only instance in this 11 issue run where Kelly really played it straight, and it was very earnest. And I'm not saying every page of every issue has to be that. It's Superboy. We're going to have fun. There's going to be some humor, but I think it was just tipped so much towards the attempted humor in the other issues. And honestly, I just didn't find it funny most of the time. And that's what I think got grating. And so for that War Letters issue, I love the setup of it, that structure of, like you said, Superboy's letter, from Apocalypse to Serling, Guardian writing to the parents of someone who was killed in action, and then the Fortress robots accounting of Crypto's actions during all of this. Like a beautiful issue. I would say if someone's going to read one issue from this run, especially if you have any interest in the Our Worlds at War event, read that one. That was the issue 91. It was great. And the Amanda Waller stuff, by the way, an awful lot of fat jokes. I mean, like from everybody, they really went in hard on the wall there.
The humor, I'm very happy you mentioned that. the humor in this run made me so uncomfortable, from his little like cracks and comments of like what you thought a 16-year-old would be in 2000 or whatever this came out, which I guess I was actually 16 when this came out. And then, yeah, all the like they go down and they have all the hillbilly jokes with Gorgeous Gilly and that whole thing. And even the credits are weird. And then the constantly talking about Amanda Waller being this really heavy set person who's a linebacker and everything. And I was just like, this is uncomfortable. This is not landing, because it doesn't seem like he's saying these things just because he's an idiot child. He's saying these things and we're supposed to find them to be genuinely funny. And I was like, this isn't working for me necessarily. Like, I don't know if maybe they just didn't have enough time or the right situation to find his voice. But, for the other characters, I thought he nailed it. But when it came to the kid himself, I was just like, nah, this is uncomfortable for everyone involved.
And so, right, like you didn't read this as it was coming out. I did. I was in high school when this was coming out. So I have read this as a teenager, ostensibly the target demo, I would assume, for this book, especially keeping in mind how they wrote Connor. I've now read it as a 38-year-old, and it's just like, it just doesn't work. Like, I didn't find it funny then, and I don't find it funny now. And I'm curious who did. So I welcome audience feedback on this. Yeah. And if you did get more mileage out of it, that's great. But I did not. But the Amanda Waller piece, the government bureaucracy side of it, that was weirdly, I think, the most intriguing aspect of it. And yes, a lot of parallels to what we're seeing right now in our country. But just, this notion of Amanda Waller being the head of the Department of Metahuman Affairs, and like you said, checking out CADMUS, which receives government funding, and essentially saying, we're going to do an audit and make sure you're pulling your weight. And in the meantime, you're going to do what we tell you to do. And that's what lands Superboy in Los Angeles and down in Florida and all these. You know what? Here's what frustrates me about this run is I feel like they had a few places to go that could have been interesting. Like when you look at just the first few issues, he gets his new look. Then there's the LA issue that we mentioned with this weird alien bar that never gets paid off. But sorry, he's in LA. Then the next one is a Gotham issue where he's with Tim Drake and the Cassandra Cain Batgirl. You look at those first few issues and it's like, oh, is this going to be Connor Kent's tour through the DCU? That could have been cool. If they had gone all in on Guardian, that could have been an interesting angle. If it had been a more cohesive run of Amanda Waller sending him on these weird offbeat missions, that could have been it. Like, I just feel like there were interesting places they could have gone, but it just ends up being a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And nothing really came together for me in this run, even though, like I said, those few aspects of it I did find enjoyable.
I mean, a lot of it too is, I think what we enjoyed about it is an attempt to tie it into the larger brand. Because Our Worlds of War was a huge, huge crossover at the time. I mean, it was just, and it was very centered around the Superman stuff. And Amanda Waller was being reintroduced after having not been in the spotlight for a while. So I think a lot of that too was, hey, we're pushing Lex as president. We're pushing this big war. We're pushing these cabinet members. Frank Rock also makes an appearance. So, a lot of it's just brand synergy, but they do it in a good way, because when the Wall shows up at CADMUS and says, we pay 30% of your budget, let's open it up. I want to see all the black stuff. I want to see everything you've cloned. Again, I keep saying this, but like, CADMUS is just the post-crisis name for Jack Kirby's DNA project. And if you go back and read that, the whole point of this secret laboratory, and this is the same organization that Grant Morrison will use in All-Star Superman as Project, which is just all capital letters. There, I don't think it has any government funding. Leo Quintum just has unlimited money. The whole idea is that the strangest, weirdest, most nonsensical, most imaginative stuff you could possibly imagine exists in this lab. It is Hogwarts crossed with the Xavier Institute, crossed with all the nonsense stuff. So I love the idea of the Wall, the poster woman for taking superheroes and making them work for the government, the establishment, and walking through these halls and saying, well, that I want, that I'm going to use to try to kill Darkseid, that I need for brain, that writes itself, right? Because she shouldn't be in there. She's the last person who should be in there. CADMUS has been shown as being quite moral for the most part. I mean, I mentioned in an earlier episode that when they make the kid, they don't remove free will or do anything like that. They let him make his own decisions, and they seem pretty caring for him. So I
Well,
love
but
the
only because he escaped early. Like Westfield
Okay,
was
sure,
planning
sure.
to control him, but then the Newsboy Legion broke him out. But
I have not read as much as you.
No, but your point stands because, and I think this is fair to say, looking at the earlier Triangle era of the comics and CADMUS, where under the direction of Westfield, like Westfield was sort of the bad actor in all of this, but then you had the grown-up Newsboy Legion and then the young clones, and you have Double X and like you have people with good intentions there. It's just when you have someone like Westfield calling the shots, it's going to get a little dubious. But still, overall, yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, no, that was it. A lot of potential, a lot of great stuff. I was excited. Again, if you had told me that there was a 6-issue Guardian series that spun off of this, was just him walking around with the adult Newsboy Legion, his foster kids basically, and just being like, well, we have to get all this stuff out of here before the wall makes a Suicide Squad out of the Harrys or whatever else is living down there. I would have loved that, but that clearly wasn't in the cards. So again, it's unfortunate, but there were good ideas there. As creators, they were allowed to show what they're good at, which is, teasing you on everything else. And if things had been different, if maybe they had less on their plates, who knows? Who knows where it would have gone? Maybe they would have finished it to issue 100 and they would have given this really solid story. Instead, it ends in a very abrupt way. And then we get a weird, ninth inning, very just strange way to end this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've not come across an interview where Joe Kelly talked about this. Maybe it's out there and I just haven't seen it. I would be curious to know. I mean, first of all, was this an assignment he sought out or desired in any way, or was it sort of like, hey, we need you to do this, we think this will help sale? I mean, I don't know. And then also, yeah, the end of it, I wonder if there was the intention to stay on longer and then scheduling just got the better of him, and that had to be it. Because it really abrupt is the perfect word for it. Oh, the other thing that's abrupt is how CADMUS just like disappears.
Gone.
Just gone.
Yeah,
just gone during this. I mean, this is Mickey, who's the head of the project at this point in time. After all of this interference from Amanda Waller, they decide to just go off grid. But it's just like Superboy shows up and it's just gone. And that's it.
Again, that felt like, in the previous episode, we were talking about the way the Ron Mars runs, and where it's like, the incoming writer was probably like, this is where I would like the characters if you can get them there. And clearly, Dan DiDio and Jimmy Palmiotti didn't want to tell a CADMUS arc. So someone must have just been like, we need to get rid of CADMUS. And it's like, all right, it disappears. Someone else will follow up on this eventually. And I don't know that they did. But again, I think it works because I think CADMUS needs to be the weird funhouse place, the Baxter building, and the idea that there's a button somewhere that you can push it and it, a boom tube pops open and it just goes into the Immateria or wherever. It's kind of cool. Again, I would have liked a little bit more story with that. The CADMUS facility appears in the Phantom Zone or something. Something really cool, something really up there. But unfortunately, that's not something we see in these pages.
No, and then that leads us to a very unlikely end for this series.
So odd.
I mean, it's one of those things where if people didn't have ready access to these issues, because they are on the app, except for issue 100, inexplicably.
Yeah, that was weird. Yeah.
It's one of those, it would sound like we're making this up, right? So the final 7 issues of the series, Superboy, well, he has nowhere to live now, of course, because CADMUS is just gone. And so he goes on an apartment hunt throughout Metropolis and ultimately ends up as the superintendent of an apartment building in Suicide Slum. This is a real thing. As we mentioned, it's Jimmy Palmiotti and Dan DiDio. And this was a Dan DiDio relatively fresh to DC. I mean, we're talking, this is 2002-ish. I mean, this is one of the first things he did. So they co-write this. Those two longtime friends.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they co-write. And John McCrea on art for almost all of those final issues. I think there are 1 or 2 fill-ins, I want to say by Anthony Williams. But that's our primary creative team. It's weird, and would I say it represents the best of the series? No. However, if you had told me that I would come into this being like, hey, I really prefer the superintendent arc over the Joe Kelly run, I would have been like, nah, but that's how I feel. I honestly, because I feel like there was more going on here. There was an attempt to create a new supporting cast and status quo for him, and it at least felt like there was some sort of arc and some continuity and cohesiveness. So, I mean, I don't know. It's like crazy to say, but I think there was something here. It was weird. And look, the whole notion of taking a very, very grounded street level approach, giving him a job as mundane and pedestrian as being a building superintendent. I mean, there's a very absurd quality to it. And maybe in terms of how they executed it, I don't know how much it would resonate with people. I don't know how much it resonated with people at the time. Obviously, these were the final issues of the book. It's not like sales skyrocketed. But I think the underlying idea of taking that more street level approach, I don't think there's anything that's inherently not valid about that. Again, the way it manifests is a little kooky, but it's intriguing if nothing else. So what was your reaction to these issues?
I was super surprised. I didn't know this happened. Again, I was very excited to see John McCrea. I love him. So I could have read his issues with no words. There is a word balloon cameo and then a cameo at the very end in the background of the Hitman character Six Pack, which means that these issues take place right after the final arc of Hitman. That made me very excited because I had no idea he drew the character again. And it's a quick, stupid thing. You don't need to know anything about it, but that was just something that made me perk up. I liked that, maybe it was because DiDio's the guy in charge, but I liked that this arc didn't have to worry about anything else. There's no tie-ins. There's nothing else. It's just, I think one of the reasons that, and I agree with you, it feels very satisfying, is because they can just do whatever they want, right? They introduce Calvin Gardens. They introduce all the supporting characters. And for the most part, they all try to get a little bit of an arc in there. And it does end also abruptly, but at the same time, it's not because of something else. It ends abruptly on its own terms, actually wrapping up in a pretty satisfying way. So I like that. I'm also a sucker for superhero or whatever wants to start over, and he's surrounded by a bunch of other people who also don't have a lot going on. Like, I love this. It's dumb, but I love this scene where he keeps taking out the garbage for the woman who has half a dozen kids. And it's like a dumb joke. It's like a visual joke, but at the same time, it's like, no, this kid needs structure and he's getting it here. Like, he doesn't know plumbing, but he's going to talk to someone who does know plumbing and he's going to fix it. So is it absurd? Yeah. Is it also kind of, I bought it? Yeah, I did at the same time.
Yeah. There's only one issue that ties in, and it's the penultimate issue. There was that Young Justice crossover event, World Without Young Justice, that tied into this, Impulse and Robin. But yeah, other than that, you got a relatively uninterrupted run. And to their credit, yes, they did craft arcs for Superboy himself and this budding new supporting cast that's introduced here, the people in the building and the neighborhood. And I really appreciated it. I mean, it felt like there was an attempt to build something here, unlike the previous run where it really just felt like it was all over the place. So as unlikely a setting as it was, it feels so weird to be like making a case for this because it's so bonkers, but there was something to it. And I found myself, as I was reading these issues, I was invested in this new cast of characters. So we have a few players here. There's the high-tech racketeers, the Run Riot group, who are shaking down this building owner and others in the neighborhood for protection money. And that's how Superboy initially ends up at this building. He saves the building's owner, what's his name, Lily? From the Run Riot group. Interestingly, one of these guys gets away and then ends up taking an apartment as a tenant right underneath Superboy with the aim towards taking his revenge. And in fact, he ends up in Superboy's apartment, and Superboy's explaining how if someone surprises him, essentially they can get through his tactile TK. And this guy is ready to shoot Superboy when Run Riot attacks, and Superboy saves this guy. And over the course of these few issues, a genuine friendship emerges. And it's surprising, particularly to this guy, Cooper is his name. And he really has this redemption arc, and you get to the final issue and he gives his life to save the tenants of the building from a bomb planted by a member of another criminal group that we'll talk about. So I mean, it was one of those things where by the time you get to that bit and Superboy's holding his body, you feel for both of them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really like the idea that, the kid needs a friend. He wants a friend. He gets a friend, and he is really upset when he thinks he's been betrayed by him. And I felt that. I was like, no, you did the groundwork. You laid that very well. And then, you see Cooper's struggling with it too. And you get a lot of pathos out of a character who's only in a handful of issues and who passes away, who almost seems as if he was introduced to do that, to make the kid have to suffer through that. So I thought it was really well done. I don't know if this was intentional. It probably is. I know that Dan DiDio loves the fourth world even more than I do, but in the original Newsboy Legion that Kirby did in the 40s that introduced the Guardian, that's where Suicide Slum was introduced. So I do like the idea that the Guardian, Jim Harper, kind of acted as a mentor figure for the kid. And I love the idea that he moved into his neighborhood in the early 2000s, 60 years after Harper lived there himself. And, they could be the same building for all we know. I mean, obviously it's not, but I like that synergy. No one mentions it, no one calls it out, but I like the idea of the kid going back to the neighborhood. And it's even possible in the early 2000s, some people would have been there like, oh yeah, Guardian used to protect this neighborhood and now you're doing it. You're doing a good job.
Yeah, no, that's nice. It's one of those things where had this continued, it would have been interesting to see them continue to build out this neighborhood and really get even more of a feel for this section of Suicide Slum. I think there could have been something there. So we mentioned Run Riot. There's also the Slaughterhouse Six. This group of criminals have given themselves powers, and one of them, Trixie, ends up having her a redemption arc of her own after coming into contact with Superboy, and she turns over a new leaf. And with both her and Cooper, I mean, you see the effect that Superboy has on these people, and I thought it said a lot about them, but more so about Superboy himself. Like I enjoyed that aspect of it as well.
I like when he's confronted with the Slaughterhouse Six group, because they all have superpowers. They're all together. They all pose a physical threat to him, but that's not the point. They don't really throw down a lot. The point is, who's she going to choose? And yeah, I like that gives her an arc. She has a femme fatale quality to her, but she's almost like Selena Kyle or Felicia Hardy or something like that, where, I think she actually gets her powers because she makes out with him or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's this, is she attracted to the Superboy or to the nice guy? And I thought that was really serviced. Again, the whole thing feels like we want to tell our own version of the story with this character, so we need to introduce new aspects so that we control them. And I thought it landed. They're pretty dense issues for, again, being less than a year all told.
Yeah, it's they're very different runs, but one of my favorite comic runs is the Catwoman run written by Ed Brubaker.
Mm.
And like I said, very different runs, but the whole neighborhood aspect, where in that run you really have Selena as the protector, this anti-hero protector of the East End of Gotham.
Yeah.
And you get elements of that here. And with time, it would have been interesting to see how that would have been developed further. There are a lot of, mundane, but I think ultimately entertaining setups, like Superboy throwing a housewarming party, but sticking Wonder Girl with all of the duties and maintaining the party, stuff like that. Superboy trying to go out for a night out on the town with his attractive neighbors at the nightclub. That's when the Slaughterhouse Six attack. So, I don't know. There was a surprising charm, I felt, to these issues here.
It was very sitcom-y, and I don't mean that in a bad way. The sitcoms are very popular for a reason, but that's what it felt like. It felt like, shenanigans are going down, but at the same time, I'm going to have to use that tactile TK special effect at least once per story. It was good because you kind of buy it. Like he's terrible at it, but he keeps trying. And from that point of view, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm kind of on your side for this. And you can see how he's very quick to be like, all these people in this building, whether or not they have it going together, they're my people now. I'm going to do my best to protect them and where they live, which I thought was great. It's funny. You keep saying, it would have been nice to see where this could go. A very similar story is told in the comic book Hawkeye by Matt Fraction. If anyone is interested in a similar concept, that has the same idea. I highly doubt he was pulling from this, but it's the same idea of Hawkeye. Actually, in that case, he's the owner of a building in Brooklyn, and you get to meet all of the people who live there and their stories and how it interacts with him. And then, when ninjas or something go to kill them, you see that they all support him too. So that was where my mind went, because that's a more celebrated run, but it's this very similar idea. And as I was reading this, I was like, oh well, I know this works. I know I like this, so I'm committed. Even again, it helped that McCrea was on the art, but again, I really don't have a lot of bad to say about it. I was very surprised. I was like, wow, I was not expecting that. At first, I thought it was a joke, Superboy, the superintendent, but no, I thought quite satisfying.
It's such a weird note to go out on, but I think like once you get past the absurdity of the setup, there's value here, like we're saying. And then in that final issue, as we discussed, the building gets destroyed and Superboy's pretty down, and then who shows up but Superman, clutch, and brings, this is a huge setup for the next era of Connor Kent Superboy. Clark brings him to the farm, brings him to Ma and Pa. The final shot of the series is them flying to the front porch, and Ma, Pa, and Krypto are waiting for him. And this is now where he's going to learn and grow, and that will lead us right into the Teen Titans, Jeff Johns iteration of the character, where he's going to Smallville High and all of that. But it's set up here, which the fact that issue 100 isn't on the app is never been collected. It's like, it's an image that people might not even be familiar with. I found it. I took a screenshot. I posted it online because it's a key moment for the character. And as much as this might feel like a very, forgettable chapter, it does set up what's to come in that moment.
It's perfect in a lot of ways if you think about it, because again, I think one of the through lines of the whole 100 issues is, a kid who was created in a test tube is looking for not just that he has value, but he's looking for a home. He didn't have parents. He didn't have anything else. He wants to find a place where he belongs, and he keeps finding these places. And for whatever reason, he keeps losing them. Right? He had CADMUS. He had Hawaii. Now he had Calvin Gardens. Now he had everything else. And in a way, him being brought to the farm where the original Superboy lived, where Superman grew up, and being introduced to Mom, Pa Kent, and Krypto, and it's like, well, these people can't get hurt. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. And now, you're here too. And it, in a lot of ways, it brings his story almost to a close, because it says, you've been searching for this. You have done good things. You have done good for others. You have, in a lot of ways, you have honored the S shield, right? Like, I was right to let you have this because you're a great superhero. You keep helping people regardless of the situation you find yourself in. And that wouldn't have necessarily been the case for everyone in your circumstances, especially not if they knew they were a genetic experiment by a bunch of questionable people with DNA they shouldn't have had. So I love that scene. I'm not a huge fan of the Connor Kent Teen Titans run in general, but I thought this was a great way to end it, because again, it's like, what is more homely than the Kent farm in Smallville? There isn't. And the idea that he could go there, and then Martha would be like, well, yeah, I know that face. I remember that face very well from, when Clark was younger, except, you have a leather jacket and the dog likes you. And yeah, let's do this, come into my home and, be part of our family. 'Cause why wouldn't you be? So I thought it was a perfect ending. It was one of those great, like, again, if this had been a sitcom and that was the last episode, no notes.
I like the way you put it, especially when you look at this ending in relation to the series as a whole. And I think that's a perfect way of looking at that arrival on the farm as a very fitting conclusion, not just to these final issues, but to that series as a whole. Because I think a less inspired approach to Superboy from the outset probably would have just plopped him on the farm from the jump, or after Reign of the Superman, it would have set him there. And one of the things I talked about in the first episode of this event is how I really do appreciate how they weren't just trying to create a carbon copy of pre-crisis Superboy. They created a character very different in terms of origin, costume, powers, characterization, and setting as well. And so to go from Hawaii to CADMUS to the Calvin Gardens and then ultimately to the farm, it really does feel like this moment of closure. And it does feel like a fitting end. So I think that is a great way to look at it. Because the 100th issue is not on the app and I had to resort to other means, when you find scans of them, they often include the letters pages, which are great. I wish the app had them. It's such a fascinating, relic and part of the reading experience. But there's a letter from the editor at the end of Superboy 100 explaining that it's the final issue. And it's funny because the letter says, let us know, like, what do you want to see from Superboy? It's like, do you want to see a new attitude, a new look, a new girlfriend? Like tell us. Which I don't want to say it smacked of desperation, but it was just, I don't know. It's just kind of a little bit. It had my impression. It had this air of like, this is what we've done has come to an end, probably not by our choosing. So it's like, what do you want? Like, what do you people want?
It's funny too. Thing made it 100 issues. I don't think that when they were designing the Reign of the Superman, that anyone was thinking that these characters were, at least two of them, were going to be as successful as they were. I mean, again, like Steel had a movie. He's in everything. He's incredibly popular. He's a great character. The kid wasn't as popular, but still to have 100 issues with tie-ins to head Young Justice, to keep the brand alive in a lot of ways, like that's not nothing. Like I think the character far exceeded the original intent for him. So to have the editor at issue 100, which is a milestone most characters don't get to, be like, what do you guys want? Is kind of for them to say, well, we didn't think we were going to get this far, and we've thrown a lot of weird stuff at you. It's almost saying, well, what do you want to do next? Because our guys have told their story. They've run their course with this, and truthfully, we don't know what else to do. So what do you tell us? You hung out a way longer than we thought you would. So I like that. And then obviously, when Jolly Green Jeff Johns introduces the Lex Luthor retcon, it's like that's Bible, right? Like no one's changing that now. So in a lot of ways, this is kind of the last time we see Superboy. We see the kid, we see Don't Call Me Superboy. And then after this, in many ways, it's almost a different character.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, much like last week's episode brought to a close the Hero of Hawaii era. I mean, the end of the series does bring to a close truly, I would say, the first major iteration from his debut in Reign through the end of his series here of the kid. And then, like you said, once we move past this point, we get the version with Lex Luthor supplying 50% of his DNA, the t-shirt and jeans look. It's now, I think, the default when people think of the character, for better or worse. And I think most people probably land on the side of for better, but there might be an argument on the other side as well. But yeah, I mean, this is really the end. And like you're saying, 100 issues, nothing to sneeze at.
It's funny too, because in a lot of ways, he's one of those characters like Power Girl or Huntress, who is very clearly defined by their pre-crisis storylines. But the way Crisis on Infinite Earths removed those aspects from the story, there was nowhere for him to go. So now you still have Superboy in name as a young character with superpowers, but they needed to append something else to him. And they gave him this nice corpus of mythology that still, for the most part, is intact. And I like that because you get to, you have your cake and eat it too. So, you can do stories about a young Clark Kent, but if you need stories about a young Superboy, you have this character to rely on. A lot of writers, use him for that. So I think it's great. I'm happy he stuck around. I'm happy that people are still interested in him.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a testament to the strength of the character that he has endured. I agree wholeheartedly. Well, listen, man, thank you very much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to compare notes.
Yeah, I love doing this. It takes me back to being at the store and talking about it. And again, I was very happy to read these issues because I don't think I would have otherwise.
Awesome. My thanks once again to both Mike and Ralph for joining me on this episode. Audience, thank you for tuning in. I always appreciate it. Make sure you come back next week for All-Star Superboy Chapter 4. We're not quite done with the initial iteration of Superboy just yet because we still have to discuss his time with Young Justice. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the 5th week event, Young Justice Sins of Youth, when the adult and teen heroes of the DCU, including Superman and Superboy, swap ages. It's a fun story and promises to be a very fun discussion, and I hope you will join us for it. And don't worry, we'll also talk about that other team that Superboy was a part of even before Young Justice. That's right, Superboy and the Ravers. You don't want to miss it. Come back next time, and until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the podcast and receive exclusive content, including bonus episodes, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Flat Squirrel Podcasts is home to Digging for Kryptonite and another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman. Please subscribe, rate, and review today, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all